I'm pretty happy with how it behaves so far. And I showed it to the customer, and they really like it. So I'm on the right track. But there's still room for improvement. As it is right now, I think the motion decays too quickly. After looking at it, I realize it's an issue with the way that the springs are attached. I'd like to improve that. I built a model to illustrate what the problem is. Here's a pair of rods in 2 dimensions, so they can pivot back and forth like so, and they're connected with springs, or in this case rubber bands. And of course you can pivot the rods independently so that they come out of parallel, and you see one of the springs extends and the other compresses or relaxes. But when you pivot the rods in parallel, if the spring is attached on the ends of the caps like so, then as they go out of 0 degrees, as the angle increases, the springs actually extend. You can see here, if you look closely, as they go all the way over here, the length of the spring is quite a bit longer. And of course the springs want to compress, so that's what throws it back to 0 degrees so quickly. But if I reconnect the springs directly to the shafts, then what we have is a perfect parallelogram. The sticks, as long as they remain parallel, the length of the spring is not going to expand or contract. Of course, as before, if the sticks will wave back and forth independently, then the length is going to change. They want to stay parallel, but as long as they're parallel, they don't care what angle they're at. Right now, the attachment of the springs is about maybe 1.5 centimeters from the center line. If I manage to attach them pretty close to the surface or the outside circumference of the rod, then they're only going to be maybe 3 or 4 millimeters from the center line of the rod. So I'll reconnect the springs now to the inside edge of each of the rods. Okay, let's see how that behaves now. The force is much weaker. There still is a force that wants to pull them back to being parallel, but it's not nearly as strong as last time. So you get a little bit of leverage that comes from being just off the center line, but not too much leverage that you get when you attach the spring far out on the cap. This thing's kind of fun to play with just by itself. Look at that. So here's my idea for how to attach the springs. I'll go and I'll make a series of divots by hammering a screwdriver. And each of there's going to be 6 of these divots. And then I'll take some spring wire. So here's a coil where the diameter is just a little bit smaller than the diameter of the oak rod. I have a little ring that should hold itself on there snugly, just where the divots are located. So a spring with a hook on the end will simply attach like so. So I've made this jig for producing the 6 divots. Here's how it works. The rod is inserted like so, and then take a hexagonal coupler nut and use that for indexing. We'll wedge the coupler nut onto the rod with a skewer, like so, and then that'll give us 6 positions to rotate the rod. And then from there, in each position, bring the screwdriver, place it in the slot here, and whack it with a hammer. And there you have the divots. Okay, I got 2 springs reconfigured to have hooks on the ends to hook into the belts. Should be enough for a minimum test. Let's see how it works. Oh yeah. The rods are more free. They feel like they're floating more. They're not being forced back into position so quickly. Okay, I have all the inner pairs connected. When the perimeter is not connected, the outside rods don't have quite as much influence. The inner rod has most of the influence. But that being the case, still, it's lighter and more lively than before. There it is. It's an emotional moment. I think the prototype is done. The rods feel lighter. Feels like the motion lasts longer. It also feels like it's not as intense initially. Maybe the previous design with more leverage on the springs was more intense in the beginning, but decayed out more quickly. And this might be less intense, but last longer. I think that's a good trade-off to make. And I'm happy with the way that the springs connect too. It's a little bit cleaner. I like that the plane of the springs is set back behind the plane of the rod caps. The system of them hooking into the belt is working very well. There's a little bit of a concern that they might unhook themselves, but so far I'm not seeing that happen. Of course, the springs are always under tension, so it would take quite a jostle for the hook to remove itself from the belt. I think this is a winning design.